Do you sense that there's a current of anger and frustration that just kind of bubbles underneath the surface of your life? If so, you just might be an Enneagram 8, and this episode is for you. This is 9 in 9, Enneagram Wisdom for Life. Let's dive in. Well, welcome to The One Question That Changes Everything. This series is about using questions to elevate self-awareness, and it comes from the work that I've done with Enneagram students and clients. I have seen the power of a question change the outcome of circumstances in the best possible way. I have seen questions impact relationships. Questions are the window to self-awareness. So I'm excited that you're here. Let's talk about Enneagram 8. As an Enneagram 8, there are traits that we know are common amongst all of the 8s out there. And I want to talk about those first, and then we'll talk about the question that can help raise your self-awareness. So the first is this avoidance of vulnerability and weakness. And it's not just a small aversion to vulnerability and weakness. It's avoiding it at all times, at all costs, in every possible way. That is the bent of being an Enneagram 8. If it makes you feel weak, if it makes you feel exposed or vulnerable, you're out immediately. The second is an over-reliance upon strength, upon your personal strength when reacting or responding to what's going on around you. You look and sort of search for a place inside you that is a place of strength in order to make something happen, or you're going to respond out of that feeling of strength. In the intro, I talked about that bubble of frustration or anger that's kind of running below the surface all the time. That's an emotion that makes you feel strong, and it's always there and able to be pulled up, at just a moment's notice. And so you may find that in order to feel strong, you tend to erupt quickly. And the third thing is that you'll bring an intensity or an aggression that you don't notice with other numbers. So for some 8s, we can really sense when an 8 walks into the room. There's just an intensity. And there's certainly more of an aggressive response. As I mentioned earlier, there's more of an aggressive response or a quick reaction, an impulse instinct, to jump into action quickly. So the question for the 8 is, what am I feeling underneath the anger or frustration? What am I feeling underneath the anger and frustration? And I had to say both words there because I'll ask sometimes an 8, what are you feeling underneath the anger? And they'll say frustration. Or I'll say, what are you feeling underneath the frustration? And they'll say anger. And so those two are almost interchangeable for an 8. And so we got to go a layer deeper than that. I remember the first time I asked this to a client who is an Enneagram 8. She had just had a phone call from one of her young adult kids. Something was not going well with them at their university. And, she was just saying like, oh, I'm just so frustrated. This is going on. And I said, well, what do you feel like is the feeling underneath the frustration? And she said, well, I'm angry about it. And I said, okay, well, what's underneath the anger? What's behind the anger? What's driving that? And so after having some conversation and her being like, I have no idea for a while, then we kind of got to that the underlying feeling was actually fear. It was fear that he was going to, ruin his college experience and then potentially, not get the college education and then could potentially not get the future that he wanted. And so when she was able to boil this down to, it wasn't actually frustration and anger, it was actually fear. That's when the progress could really be made. And so that's the power of this question, is that first it works because it clues you in. It gives you clues to the bigger reality, the bigger picture of what's going on, what's really happening when you're tempted to respond with that quick anger, frustration response, it gives you insight into the bigger picture of what's happening. Now, the second thing that can happen when you use this question is that if you can catch yourself soon enough before you form the reaction, then this is going to allow you to consult your emotion and your thinking before just going straight into action. The 8 is such a strong doing number that, of course, the first thing is like, oh, I'm going to respond. I'm going to react. If you can insert this question before responding, then it's going to really allow you to balance out those centers of intelligence. And so you're consulting your emotion, your true feelings, and you're consulting thinking. You're thinking about, okay, so now that I know that I'm not actually angry, I'm actually afraid. Now, how do I want to respond? And then that engages that thinking center. And the impact that this has on relationships, as you can imagine, is huge. And speaking of relationships, when you ask this question, it allows you to be vulnerable. And I know vulnerability and weakness is to be avoided at all costs if you're an Enneagram 8, but relationships require vulnerability. Relationships that are deep and meaningful require you to show your weak side. And when you can get truly in touch with the softer emotions, it allows you to bond and connect with the people that you care about in a very real and deep way. So you're going to have better relationships, not just with yourself, but with the people you care about, with your family, and with God. Is going to deeply impact the relationships you have if you can allow yourself to feel feelings beyond anger and frustration and really get honest about that. Okay, one more quick story about an Enneagram 8 who does not shy away from conflict. In fact, secretly, she confesses she really kind of enjoys, maybe throwing out some controversial topic at the family dinner table just to see what happens. Well, you can imagine that makes for some very intense, heated discussions that often lead to argument, that often leads to disconnection within her family. So at one such occasion, she's there at the family dinner and something is said that makes her really mad, really mad. And she decided, I'm so proud of her, she decided to ask this question to herself before jumping into the conflict, which she would have been totally fine to do. She doesn't mind conflict one single bit. But she decided, you know what? I wonder why that's making me so angry. Well, she realized it actually really hurt her feelings because what they said very, very much devalued what she had worked very, very hard on. And so she decided to just be honest and to show some vulnerability, which was very hard. But she said, what you just said really hurt. And I worked really hard on that, and I don't feel like you valued it at all. Let me just tell you, what could have gone from a family fight that ended in people not talking for who knows how long, weeks, months, I don't know, ended with a conversation, deeper understanding, and more connection. I just think that her bravery, her courage to ask that question before she jumped into the conflict was enormously impactful. So to recap, the question is, what feeling is underneath my anger and frustration? And what this does is it allows you to connect with the bigger picture, the reality, the truth of what's going on. It allows you to consult your thinking and your feeling centers before you simply react. And it opens the possibility of a little bit of vulnerability within your relationships so that you can have deeper and more connected friends, family, and relationship to yourself and God. So if you enjoyed this and you want to know more, I'd love to have you in one of our upcoming Enneagram classes. All you need to do is go to livingwellbyjen.com/Enneagram, and I hope to see you there.